Hello and welcome to my puzzle of practice presentation. Are English language learners marginalized in classrooms when teachers cluster them as one group of learners? Chances are that as new educators, we have preconceived ideas about what English language learners look like and what it means to teach English language learners in our own classrooms. English language learners are a highly heterogeneous and complex group of students. They have diverse educational needs, backgrounds, languages, goals, and gifts. English language learners are more different than they are alike. As educators, we are marginalizing these students if we only view them under the umbrella of English language learning. Some ELLs may only speak their native language at home, while others have been exposed to a multitude of languages. ELL students may have a deep sense of their own culture, a strong sense of multiple cultures, or they may only identify with the US culture. There is no single profile for an ELL student or a single way to instruct an ELL student to service their unique needs in the classroom. There's an emerging and underserved population of ELLs. So who are Colorado's English language learners? Colorado enrollment rate for ELLs is exponentially higher than the overall enrollment rate for the K-12 education. ELL enrollment rate has increased 260% over the last decade in Colorado. Colorado is among the 12 states with the highest ELL population growth rates. This map illustrates the national LEP population growth in schools between 1994 and 2006. LEP stands for Limited English Proficiency. This term is used by the Department of Education to refer to ELLs who lack sufficient mastery of English to meet state standards and excel in English language classroom. This data illustrates a significant link between the ELL population and their socioeconomic status. 75% of ELLs are eligible for free lunch and 8% are eligible for reduced lunch. Almost a third of all ELL students are non-English proficient, while almost half are limited English proficient. The vast majority of ELLs in Colorado are Hispanic, but that doesn't mean that as educators we can overlook the other 16% of ELLs. The ELL population is fairly evenly split between males and females. While in the 2010-2011 school year, there were 165 different languages represented by Colorado ELLs, this chart illustrates the top 20 languages spoken by Colorado English language learners. ELLs do not fit easily into simple categories, but rather comprise very different groups. A surprising statistic is that 57% of adolescent ELLs were born in the United States, while 43% were born elsewhere. As educators, we must consider where English language learners fall on the language learning proficiency spectrum. We must also consider their socioeconomic standing, the expectation of schooling as defined by their families and culture, their individual content knowledge, and their immigration status. According to research, differences in school performance among ELL students have a lot to do with whether they were voluntary or involuntary immigrants to the United States. So what are some barriers to improving the academic achievement of Hispanic ELL students? In a study done in Colorado, teachers and families were asked to define the major barriers to student achievement. Those were communication gaps between school and home, lack of support for families in transition to a new environment and a new culture, and lack of teacher preparation in multiculturalism, language acquisition, and ELL instructional strategies. According to the National Council of Teachers of English, less than 13% of teachers have received professional development on teaching ELLs, and despite the growing number of ELLs, only 3 states have policies that require all teachers to have some expertise in teaching ELLs effectively. According to researchers, students from a particular culture are likely to perform poorly academically, regard school negatively, and break classroom rules if teaching styles do not match the ways they communicate and learn. The U.S. Department of Education defines a framework for RTI that addresses the needs for ELLs. This includes a systematic process for examining the specific background variables of ELLs that impact academic achievement in U.S. classrooms, the examination of appropriateness of classroom instruction and the classroom context based on knowledge of individual student factors, the information gathered through informal and formal assessments, and the non-discriminatory interpretation of all assessment data. But what exactly is a systematic process for examining the specific background variables of English language learners? Without adequate professional development, most teachers are left wondering and left to find the answers on their own. Information about cultural proficiency as pertaining to ELL's specific culture may be hard to find for teachers. Individual districts lack an authentic blueprint that would inform teachers of student cultural norms and learning and communication styles as defined by their specific culture. Some of the research I have found is that Latino students tend to improve academically with cooperative learning methods of teaching. Such students tend to be field dependent. That means they prefer working together. Anglo-American students, on the other hand, tend to be field independent, or they prefer goal-oriented activities. They tend to be more competitive, analytical, and logical. Currently, ELLs are overrepresented in special education. Studies show that many current assessments do not differentiate between disabilities and linguistic differences. This can lead to misdiagnosis of ELLs. ELLs from certain cultures may be reluctant to demonstrate their knowledge. This may have little to do with their English level proficiency. For example, in many ELL Asian families, students may be reluctant to express their feelings in creative writing, speech, and English because their parents teach them to conceal their feelings. Showing off is looked down upon. Parents of certain Asian ELLs may emphasize humility and modesty in education. Therefore, they would encourage their children to remain quiet and avoid discussion and avoid challenging the teacher's knowledge in any way. So how can we as educators authentically tap into students' culture and language? One thing is clear, truly serving the needs of our ELL population needs to go beyond reading a book about Cinco de Mayo or simply posting some visual cues around the room. So what have I done during my student teaching, and how have I marginalized the ELLs in my classroom? When I started student teaching, 4 out of 20 children in my classroom were ELLs. One was a boy from Mexico, another was a boy from Japan. There was a girl from Jordan and a girl from Saudi Arabia. One thing that I did to marginalize these students was I did not take 100% responsibility for these students in my classroom. Rather, I would really rely on the ELL teacher. I think part of that may be because I was student teaching and that it was not my own classroom. But still, I wish that I had made a greater effort to take full responsibility for the ELL students in my classroom. When I try to think back on how I marginalized ELL students, one specific example comes to mind. The little girl from Saudi Arabia was not allowed to attend music class per parent request. I made little effort to find out why. Instead, I made a lot of assumptions and assumed that it was because of their sexist culture. Also, I did little to find out the level of proficiency of my students in their native language. All ELL students learn English in the same way. This is a common myth. Some ELLs speak languages with English cognates, while others speak languages with little lexical similarity to English. This fact, of course, affects the way these students acquire English. Teachers' cultural proficiency must go beyond the superficial level. So what can we do better? As teachers, we've heard it all before. We must learn about our students' backgrounds and find culturally relevant resources to teach content. Becoming truly familiar with students' background knowledge and prior knowledge can be challenging for a single teacher. Unfortunately, without adequate district resources, it is often up to the teacher to research students' native countries, cultures, and educational systems. In order to gain a deeper understanding of where the student is coming from, teachers should also research historical figures, musical and artistic traditions, geography, and biodiversity in their students' country. In order to make learning meaningful for these students, we must tap into the schema, or their mental framework, by which our students organize concepts. Technology resources are also a great way to give ELLs a chance to demonstrate the content knowledge. The CDE is moving towards greater accountability for classroom teachers with respect to the academic performance of the ELLs in their classroom. General ed teachers will be responsible for their ELL students meeting standards across all content areas. So what does that mean for us? While certain general practices work well for most ELLs, we as educators cannot make those students successful by clustering them into a single group. We must dive deep into the ELL students' individual circumstance. That means thoroughly and authentically discovering the student's prior schooling experience, their socioeconomic position, their content knowledge, their immigration status, their group culture, and their individual family culture. As with all students, we as educators must recognize and decipher the ELL students' individual areas of strength and struggle. Is a student not demonstrating something because they cannot understand English, or are they simply afraid of being perceived as disrespectful towards the teacher? Furthermore, teachers must appeal to the districts, and districts must appeal to the policymakers at the state level to receive more adequate training, not just on what to do to make English language learners successful, but exactly how to do it for individualized groups within the ELL population. As new educators, we will be faced with a multitude of challenges. At the very least, we need to think metacognitively about the probability of marginalizing ELL students when we view them as a single homogeneous group of learners.